trouble with readiness reviews. Let's back up a little bit. Readiness reviews are an answer to that, often quoted bit of leadership wisdom: trust but verify. Obviously, readiness reviews would fit into the verify part of the formula. However, that particular bit of leadership wisdom is, call it, abbreviated when it's quoted. What the actual wisdom is: trust but verify and correct the deficiencies. And that brings us back to the trouble with readiness reviews. So the problem with readiness reviews is generally twofold. The first is the sheer volume of deficiency that a typical readiness review ends up revealing. Now, let's say you're working in an environment where you only want to do a single turnaround readiness review, and you want to do it, say, 6 weeks out or 4 weeks out from your execution date. That's only going to be a useful investment if you're talking about a top-tier team that you already know is going to be performing above 90% in terms of deliverables and timelines. Because otherwise there just isn't going to be any time to do anything. That top-tier team would get the advantage of now knowing those 1 or 2 things that maybe they missed or didn't deal with adequately and be ready for them during execution. That's not really the same as correcting them. So maybe instead you're determined to follow the more industry best practice, which is to conduct a turnaround readiness review at the end of every phase. And that is certainly very sound advice. As I said, it is industry best practice. But the trouble remains the sheer volume that, say, and I'm looking at this from a senior leadership perspective. So say the vice president or senior vice president that sits as chair of the strategy team is wanting to keep up on this, but the second phase readiness review comes back at like 49%. Well, that's a sea of red ink in terms of compliance failure. Where should that person begin? So the answer to that, I feel, is twofold. The first is understanding that and this isn't a design thing, it just ends up being that way, but in virtually all well-built processes, about 20-ish% of the actual action items and deliverables and timelines will be what I refer to as key deliverables, and they will typically, if you execute that 20% right, you'd typically expect to gain about 80% of the process's promise on both, budget and schedule. So that's a pretty good thing to target. So that would be the first thing. My first advice for that executive is know what your key deliverables are. Because as a vice president or senior vice president, you can't, pursue 100 different, compliance failures on any given day. So you need to focus your results. The other approach that I think is worth considering is to go to what I would call a more continuous development process rather than a series of given readiness reviews. Perhaps you bring in that third-party consultant, a third-party consultant such as myself, to review your progress against your process and report out to that senior leadership group. And then that report comes with 2 benefits. One is if we do this on a monthly or bi-monthly basis, we're not going to be faced with having to call a dozen or 2 dozen different department heads about deficiencies in their department. We're going to catch things in the 1s and 2s. And on top of that, a consultant such as myself or another Advando consultant can help you identify, which item on this month's report is most going to benefit you if you pursue it personally through to compliance. And maybe what other 2 or 3 things are probably worth a phone call of your time. So that's a proposal that you can put some thought into to address the second part of readiness review issues, that of the magnitude just being too great. Now, of course, like I suggested at the very beginning, as your team's expertise and maturity improves, then the expectations are your readiness review results improve also. And perhaps there comes a time when rolling it back to one review once a phase is now sufficient again. But let's get back to understanding that it is trust, but verify and correct deficiencies. And that's how we can help bring turnarounds into the next generation. Because as I've been saying for quite some time now, when turnarounds fail, it is almost always because of compliance to process failure. And I am always talking about your process, right? That would be always what we would review you against, is your process. Have a good day. Think about it.